Forget jump scares. These monsters don't chase you, they seduce you. From space vampires burning down London to lab-grown predators hunting for mates, here are 14 films where beauty is just camouflage for the kill. What makes Black Sunday so important is how clearly it locks in the visual rules Italian horror would use for decades. The film builds everything around Barbara Steele's face, pale skin, dark eyes, framed by heavy contrast lighting that turns her into the center of every frame, whether she's alive, dead, or somewhere between. The sets are simple, but the combination of fog, candlelight, and deep shadows gives every corridor and graveyard a clear shape. Most horror of the time leaned on shock or creature design. This one leans on composition and contrast, using beauty and decay in the same image. Steele plays both sides of that divide, switching from fragile to predatory without changing the visual language around her. For me, Black Sunday still feels like the blueprint for how Italian Gothic horror should look and move. Ken Russell turned a Bram Stoker story into a surreal British fever dream, making The Lair of the White Worm a masterpiece of camp horror. The terror here is entirely personality-driven rather than reliant on jump scares. Notice Amanda Donahoe's performance, specifically her stillness. She moves with a measured, aristocratic posture, treating ritual murder with the same casual air as pouring tea. The visuals back this up with hallucinogenic sequences, full of neon crosses and snakes, but the real anchor is the social manipulation. While most serpent myth stories chase massive scale or heavy practical effects to sell the threat, this film relies on pure attitude. The monster isn't scary because it has big teeth. It's scary because it has better manners than you. A bizarre, fiercely original entry that succeeds by refusing to take itself too seriously. Tony Scott stripped the gothic dust off the genre with The Hunger, treating the vampire myth as a cold, high-fashion tragedy. The camera frames Catherine Deneuve with a soft-edge halo, keeping her composed while everything around her rots. The interiors feel more like fashion shoots than horror sets. Posture and fabric do more work here than any jump scare. While most 80s vampire films relied on noise and bloodshed, this one runs on silence and attitude. The practical aging work on David Bowie remains brutally effective, charting his decline in clear, unforgiving steps. It's a wonderfully weird classic that struggled on release because the marketing team had no idea how to promote something this distinct. Spring is a genuine anomaly. I guarantee you haven't seen anything like it. It operates like a grounded indie romance hijacked by Lovecraftian biology. The filmmakers delivered this on a micro-budget, criminally earning less than $50,000 at the global box office, yet it visually outclasses studio films costing millions. The story tracks an American drifter falling for a woman whose body is a ticking clock of ancient genetics. The film uses the scenic Italian coast to lower your guard, making the shift into darkness feel abrupt and jarring. When the mutations finally hit, the practical effects are slimy, chaotic, and anatomical, looking more like a medical disaster than a movie monster. It is a groundbreaking entry that secures its place as a future cult classic because it pulls off a nearly impossible balance. The body horror is genuinely repulsive, but the relationship remains totally convincing. Cat People set the template for desire turning monstrous in the 40s, long before the color and chaos of the later remake. The grandmother of the genre, it proved that psychological terror hits harder than any rubber suit creature ever could. The film builds its tension around intimacy itself, a woman terrified that her own passion might turn her into something predatory. The pool sequence remains the perfect example. A shadow, a ripple, a sound doing more work than any reveal. Its legacy is monumental, showing Hollywood that what you don't show is often the sharpest tool in the room. A bold 1980s remake flips the 1942 original on its head, turning Cat People into something feral, neon, and unapologetically explicit. Where the first film relied on shadow and repression due to a restrictive budget, this version utilizes $18 million to make every implication literal and impossible to ignore. The cast elevates the material beyond a standard creature feature. Nastassja Kinski anchors the film with pure physicality, stalking through scenes with a predator's grace, while Malcolm McDowell brings a feral intensity. John Hurd provides the critical counterweight, grounding the supernatural elements with a weary, cynical performance that makes the madness feel real. The production design abandons the noir fog for a sweaty, neon-soaked Miami aesthetic. The transformation centerpiece, rooted in animal presence and unsettling physical detail, becomes the film's boldest break from the 1940s approach, fully rejecting the fade-to-black modesty of the era. It's not necessarily superior to the original, but it's undeniably more honest. It trades psychological suggestion for a visceral, erotic dread that the first film was only permitted to whisper. Daughters of Darkness abandons the Gothic castle entirely, placing its vampires in a stark, wind-swept modern hotel. Delphine Seyrig plays the Countess with a bored, aristocratic detachment, treating bloodlust like a high-class vice rather than a curse. Instead of hiding the horror in darkness, the director uses bright, cold lighting to expose the characters, creating a sense of isolation that feels totally modern. The tension relies on dialogue and shifting power dynamics rather than jump scares. Seyrig dominates every frame, using her voice and posture to entrap the young couple in a psychological game. This is essential viewing if you want elegant adult horror where the monster kills with charm before teeth. Countess Dracula was produced by Hammer Films, the British studio famous for defining Gothic horror in the 60s with bright red blood and heavy atmosphere. However, this entry breaks their usual fantasy formula by adapting the grim history of Elizabeth Bathory. She was the real 17th century noblewoman accused of murdering hundreds of girls to bathe in their blood. Ingrid Pitt fought for the role because she saw it as a psychological tragedy about aging, not a standard monster movie. The makeup progression in the mirror scenes creates the horror. The prosthetics for her old age are jagged and realistic, contrasting sharply with the soft lighting used when she restores her youth. It avoids the studio's typical theatrical style to deliver a harsh, historical account of vanity, turning into a lethal addiction. The Vampire Lovers hit screens in 1970 and effectively saved Hammer Films from bankruptcy by embracing the erotic nature of the original Carmilla story. This film adapts Sheridan Le Fanu's 1872 novella, a foundational text that predates Dracula and defined the female vampire trope long before cinema existed. Produced on a tight budget, the studio relied on heavy, low-lying fog and Ingrid Pitt's commanding performance to mask the limited sets. The horror here is colorful and direct. The bright Technicolor blood stands out sharply against the pale gowns. Pitt plays the predator with a tragic, desperate edge that elevates the material above simple exploitation. It created the definitive blueprint for the seductive monster archetype, marking the exact moment the genre decided to stop being subtle. It's a bit campy by modern standards, but Ingrid Pitt's charisma makes it totally unmissable. Jonathan Glazer stripped the alien invasion movie down to its coldest essentials with Under the Skin. Scarlett Johansson plays the Predator, an entity wearing a human suit to harvest men in Glasgow. They used hidden cameras to capture interactions with real, unsuspecting pedestrians, giving the film a voyeuristic texture that feels dangerously real. Glazer rejects standard violence, choosing to submerge victims in a silent, black liquid void that remains one of the most striking visual concepts of the last decade. This mechanical indifference makes it infinitely more disturbing than a standard creature feature. It's a cold, alien masterpiece that creates a specific kind of dread most horror films never touch, the feeling of being hunted by something that doesn't even hate you. I absolutely love the visual aesthetic of The Love Witch. It's like a lost Technicolor film from the 1970s. That's not a digital filter. Director Anna Biller shot on 35mm film with vintage-style lenses to replicate the period look, even handcrafting the props and costumes herself to make every shade of pink and red pop on screen. All on a budget of roughly $350,000. Most modern occult films use shadow to signal danger, but this uses bright, aggressive color to disarm you. It creates a false sense of safety that makes the eventual violence feel shocking. It's criminally overlooked because people mistake the deliberate, stiff acting for bad directing, or simply because it slipped under the radar. Samantha Robinson gives the film its seductive edge, playing a lovelorn witch whose search for the perfect man becomes a slow-motion disaster. Honestly, the visual style alone makes it a masterpiece. It's a brilliant, sharp-edged satire wrapped in the most beautiful package you'll ever see. Robert Rodriguez pulls the ultimate bait-and-switch with From Dusk Till Dawn. For the first hour, it's a sweaty, Tarantino-scripted hostage thriller, but then it hits the titty twister bar and pivots instantly into a splatterfest. The turning point is Salma Hayek. Her tabletop dance as Santanico Pandemonium isn't just iconic, it's the single sexiest villain reveal in movie history. She holds the room in a trance, making the eventual vampire transformation genuinely shocking, because the seduction was so mesmerizing. It's the perfect cinematic honey trap. She makes you forget the danger until the fangs are already in your neck. Tobe Hooper blew $25 million, turning London into a zombie apocalypse. But the image that burns into your brain is Mathilda May. Although she is only on screen for about 7 minutes, she anchors the entire film. Casting was a nightmare until they found May, a French ballet dancer who didn't speak a word of English. That real-life isolation translates perfectly into her performance. She moves with an otherworldly, eerie detachment that feels genuinely alien. She walks through the exploding sets and crumbling streets with perfect, dancer-like posture, treating the chaos around her like background noise. For a generation of men renting VHS tapes in the mid-80s, this performance rewired their brain. Plus, honestly, where else are you going to see Patrick Stewart making out with Steve Railsback? It is a truly one-of-a-kind film simply because it's so rare that a crazy B-movie concept gets this kind of massive budget treatment. This is a director realizing he'd never get this chance again, going all out and leaving absolutely nothing on the floor, including May's underwear. Species starts with one of the sleaziest studio notes in history. Make the monster look good naked. MGM wanted a creature that could double as a Playboy centerfold, so they hired H.R. Geiger to make the nightmare seductive. It was a bizarre gamble, asking the father of biomechanical terror to design something you were meant to desire. The result is Syl. Natasha Henstridge plays her with blank, lethal curiosity, snapping from supermodel elegance to translucent, spike-covered killer like it's nothing. The film surrounds her with an absurdly stacked cast, racing through a plot that is pure 90s sci-fi trash in the most glorious way. It swaps atmosphere for momentum, turning every sequence into high-octane creature chaos. Species defined the model monster era, proving you can take a B-movie premise, load it with A-tier money, and create a franchise that never apologizes for being horny. Even after the spikes come out, you understand exactly why humanity never stood a chance. Ultimately, these films prove the scariest monsters are the ones you invite in. If I missed a definitive entry, drop it in the comments. Stick around for more genre deep dives. Subscribe to VintageVerse. See you in the next one.